thought I was playing short, but I'm playing third.
Yeah, you're moving to third. Wait, does that make me Jeter? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's a great
cool,
compliment.
I'll take it. Anyway, well, thank you all for having us. This is especially fun for me. You know, like I often get up. I was here yesterday interviewing Tony Ressler, your friend, and Mayor of Atlanta, and Dr. Gale from Spelman. But this isn't sort of a typical interview because, shameless plug, we have a show. We have a show coming out in January called The Deal, brought to you by Bloomberg. And so we've been interviewing a lot of interesting people. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But, you know, I was thinking about, as I've gotten to know you really well over the last couple of years, and we've been doing this show, you are in such an interesting moment right now. And a lot of people here admired your work on the ball field. They know that you've been a very serious business person and investor for a number of years. But I have to say, and I sit about this close to you when we're doing our show, you're very consciously leveling up, I feel like, at this moment. And I don't know if you would agree with that, and I want to take you specifically to your relatively new ownership stake in the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Lynx. And understand, yep. And by the way, awesome season so far.
Thank you.
For the T-Wolves. Tony Ressler, who was sitting where you were yesterday, envies that record. But tell us about that experience, because this is new. You're on the other side of the table. Mm-hmm. You sat across from George Steinbrenner and other owners across the years. What's it like sitting there?
Yeah, I mean, Jason, I played for almost 25 years in the big leagues. First of all, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. And I was one of 750 players in the major leagues, which was pretty exciting. And when you think about now being one of 30, sometimes it's surreal. And I was recently at a board meeting, and to my left, I have Jeannie Buss. To my right, I have Mark Cuban, Tony Ressler, Mark Lazary used to be there. And these are the families that I've grown up watching, admiring, and I'm one of 30 in the room. I think I'm the only man of color in the room, which is, you know, a huge responsibility for me. And it's surreal. And I just think about, like, wow, dreams can happen. And it can only mainly happen in this great country of America, which you can be a ball player and then be an owner.
Yeah. All right, so I want to stick on something that you just said, because you being a man of color at that table is historic. You and Michael Jordan, I believe, were the only, and now he is obviously exited to a new ownership group, or a new ownership group coming in Charlotte. Talk to us, tell this audience about that experience and sort of the mindset that you go in knowing that you got a lot that you're carrying into that room.
Well, it's definitely a lot of responsibilities, and something I take very seriously. And my great friend and mentor, Magic Johnson, when I sat with him almost 30 years ago today, it was because of him that I am here today. Because, yes, I grew up watching a lot of successful people and unsuccessful people. But when I saw Magic, I said, here's a guy that plays like me, he looks like me. And, you know, when you're an athlete and you're a man of color, people consider you double dumb, right? You're an athlete, jock, you're dumb, and you're a man of color, you're probably not very smart. So you kind of come in with this negative bias, which I've always used it as a competitive advantage. I know Magic has as well. And then as our job, how do we bridge communities, right? How do we bridge this community to that community? And I find myself as an owner talking to our players. 10 of our 15 players are under the age of 25. Average age is 22. And these contracts are just getting wilder and bigger and bigger. I mean, you saw Ohtani just signed for $700 million, and the number's only going to get bigger. So when I meet with my players, we talk about wisdom is prevention, right? And the more wisdom you have, it helps you eliminate all the white noise and all these negative temptations. So it's kind of weird. Sometimes I forget that I play baseball, and I'm just a businessman now.
And so that relationship with your players, I mean, one of the hallmarks of your career, and, you know, I've talked to people that you played for and played around. You know, we had an amazing interview, I dare say, that's going to come out with Derek Jeter about sort of your experiences together, you know, in the hot house of New York. you were well known for literally not even taking off your cleats and like walking into Jerry Reinsdorf's office or George Steinbrenner and looking for advice. Now you're on that other side, as I mentioned. How do you give advice? What's the advice that you're giving players, those 20-something players who they're looking to you, and they're looking at you differently than they would look at Tony Wrestler or somebody like that, because you've been in their shoes, as you say, in more ways than one.
Yeah, Tony advises me and I advise the players.
Right.
And sometimes it's intimidating. I mean, even when you're someone coming up, I came up from the very bottom. I saw food stamps for the first time and slipped out of my mom's purse when we were paying at Publix. And I said, "Mom, what is that?" It looked like Monopoly money. I've never seen color that's like red. And she's like, well, I mean, she had a little shame and she put her head down and she goes, well, that's, some government help that they're giving us. And I was like, at the age of 12, I literally went home that night and prayed. And I said, dear God, if I can ever, get going so I can help my mother. And our rent was $550 and we had a hard time paying that. So coming at it from that prism is, it's a responsibility. And what I feel with the young players is, you got to give them the tools. And what I do is now, unlike when we grew up, Jason, there's so many ways that players can get a hold of us. DM, LinkedIn, emails, they can just reach our website. And I've talked to hundreds of athletes. And I recently got a text, which I get a lot from, a DM that said, "Hey Rod, how you doing? My name is so-and-so. Would you help me with my hitting and would you help me with my finances?" And I said, well, I can't help you with your hitting, but we can talk finances all you want and financial literacy. And what I usually do, Jason, is I never give advice on what to invest. I usually talk about prevent defense, how to protect yourself, how to have the right attorney, the right business manager, and the right advisors, and create a little bit of a wall of protection.
Yeah.
And then go find the best people in the world, let them go and try to get a seat on their bus and go with them and learn while you're investing.
Yeah. And so as you think about, and I alluded to this earlier, but your real estate empire, as it were, or as it is, starts with a very early investment in Miami. You and I stood on at one of your new properties and basically like looked down at that first investment that you made. You've obviously done a lot around real estate, venture capital, now team ownership. We were backstage with Mike Milken, and he asked the question, which I'll ask you. How do you fit it all in? How do you sort of split your time? What's your advice to a group that is probably like you, acting with a sense of urgency, acting with a sense of responsibility? How do you pick and choose?
Yeah, I mean, first I have 5 direct reports, and it all comes down to people. And our venture arm is called VCP. V stands for vision, right? You want to have a crystal clear vision of where you want to be 1, 3, 5 years from now, right? The C is you got to deploy capital to crystallize your vision. And the hardest part is always the last one, is P, is people. And, as a leader of my company, I set the culture, the vision, and then I go recruit the best people in the world. And that's really what I try to do. And if you do those 3 letters correctly, there's a lot you can do. But if you're off 1 or 2, you're going to be off balance. So yeah. I usually spend my time with the vision, recruiting people, and then charging forward.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I also find interesting about you, again, getting to know you a little bit, is you do act with a real sense of urgency, a real sense of energy. Where does that come from? How do you draw on that, or where does it emanate?
I grew up in, I never told you the story, Jason, but I guess I'm a lot like my mom, right? And my dad was, before he left at the age of 10, he left us back home in Miami. My mom was a really tough lady. And I was born in Washington Heights, right in the shadows of Yankee Stadium, very close to the Bronx. And we lived in a building, and we were on the first floor. As you walk into the building, it was like one of those fourplexes. We were to the right. And as you go to the right, the first room to the right, that's where a shoe store. And we sold shoes to everybody in the neighborhood. But my mom, she used to work at General Motors, and she would go there every morning, leave very early. And there was a drug dealer that lived in 4B, okay? And I guess he'd said something to my sister. And this was the guy that everybody feared in the whole neighborhood. And she got home and she got a hold of this. And she went and knocking on her door like at 9 o'clock at night after dinner. And I thought we were dead. I said, okay, we've lost mom. And she says, if you ever talk to my daughter again, or any of my kids for that matter, you're gonna have to deal with me, and I'm in 1B. And I thought she was dead. And the guy, who's a very powerful guy, he was like, yes, ma'am, Miss Lourdes, we got you. And as a matter of fact, if anybody messes with any of your kids, they're gonna have to mess with me. He goes, that's right. So, I mean, just watching my mom and her courage fight for us, having 2 jobs, I think that's where I get, my grit and my urgency.
Yeah. You know, it's also been interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit out of school, so forgive me in advance. But it's been fascinating for me to watch you, with this show, The Deal, coming from Bloomberg early in the year. Shameless plug. But it's been fascinating for me to watch you turn the tables a little bit yourself, because you've been interviewed a million times. But I also know that you have this very deep sense of curiosity. You're an autodidact. I mean, you are self-taught for everything that you've done. How do you approach that? I mean, I know I have a sense of how you approach our interviews. We prep, but what's in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, look, growing up, I used to love Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. I used to love Michael Jordan. I used to love Cal Ripken because he's a big shortstop. And I love autobiographies. And history has a great way to teach you. Nothing against fiction books, but that's not my thing. I like reading about history and people that have done great things and have moved things. And I just love learning about the past, and whether it's baseball, business, giving back to the community. And I'm obsessed with information. If I'm not learning every day, I want to peak, Jason, when I'm 80 years old. I don't want to peak in the next 50, 30 years. I want to, every day, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Yeah. I mean, it's also been interesting to watch you because you have this amazing instinct for the follow-up. We were taping this interview 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago with Hannah Storm.
Yeah.
And this guy, we're sitting there, and she starts telling this story, and you lean in, and you're like, you remember what you were wearing? And she's like, no one's ever asked me. I mean, you have this knack for asking these questions.
And then I said, what shoes were you wearing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're following up. I do, marvel at that sense of curiosity. I want to take that idea back to the players who are coming to you, because I feel like all of us in this room, if we're doing our jobs right, are often approached by younger people and, looking for, as John says, a hand up. What's the advice that you can give this room about, I'm almost asking you for advice about advice. How do you dispense it? How do you tell people things in a way that you feel like will resonate? What's your secret there?
Well, first of all, I think encouraging young people to ask the question. We live in a world where everybody lives in social media, and our communicating skills are deteriorating slowly. One of the things I do with my girls every night when we have dinner is we have no phones, no iPads, and one conversation. And we practice listening, right? It drives me crazy. So giving young people the encouragement to say there is no such thing as a dumb question. If you're respectful, you mentioned wrestler, we mentioned Magic Johnson, you name it, whoever it is, Mike Milken. What you find with most successful people, if you're polite and you're respectful and you ask for 10 or 15 minutes, if they have it, they will give it to you. So half the battle is showing up on time with a good attitude, with a notepad and a pen and no damn phone on the table, and say, Mr. Milken, if you were 20 years old, what are the 3 things I can focus on? And then you speak from the heart, and you read it. But I think it's really important to be available for those young people because, like I said, if it wasn't for Magic Johnson and his advice, him putting his hand on me, the proximity to greatness, I wouldn't be here today. So now it's my job to pay it forward to the next 100, thousands of young kids that want to learn from me.
Yeah. And, one of the interesting things I've also observed about you, additionally to the work we're doing together, is the work you've done around baseball. It's fun to watch you and Jeter and Big Papi sort of get up there and break it down. How do you approach something like that? Again, because I feel like one of the things that we've heard over the last couple of days is, pushing yourself into things you might not be as comfortable in, to have new experiences. Broadcasting is a pretty well-trod path, but it's not for everyone, and candidly, not everyone's good at it. It feels like you've worked hard to be good at it. What was attractive about that for you?
I mean, first of all, I've never, growing up, I always played with kids that were older, so I never felt like I was the most talented. So I had to be first in line. I had to show up with energy, enthusiasm, work ethic, just to catch up. And I mean, what a privilege for me to sit there with Fox, and I have three of my best friends in the world: Derek Jeter, a legend; Big Papi, a legend; Kevin Burkhardt, who does the NFL games on Sundays. And I'm sitting there, and every day, Jason, I learn something. When we're in the green room talking about what are the most interesting things that happen in October before a playoff game or World Series game, I'm learning from those guys. And the fan base, we have that in common. We love the game of baseball. And if I can take a very complicated issue like this Ohtani, for example, that he deferred, he's making $2 million a year for 10 years and then 60, like unpacking complicated things and letting people that love the game digest it for them. Helping it digest for them where it's digestible, I think that I just get a lot of joy out of that.
All right, well, you gave me a great opening. Can we talk about Ohtani for a second? I mean,
Sure.
I'm obsessed with this. Like,
It's crazy.
we'll probably end up talking about this on our show, but like, so here's an amazing thing that I read that you probably saw as well on social media, is that basically his contract is so big, even relative to Mike Trout, that it was the difference between the Trout contract and the Ohtani contract is an A-Rod contract, which is no small fee, I have to say. That's not a small amount of money. How did this come about? From a business person's perspective, now as an owner's perspective, how do you look at a deal like that? And what does it mean for baseball? What does it mean for sports? Especially because you've got your own payroll you've got to deal with at the T-Wolves and the Lynx.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what you have with Ohtani in basic terms is a great deal for the Dodgers, is a great deal for Ohtani, is a poor deal for baseball and for 29 other owners. And the reason why, just to give you an example, the Dodgers collect $250 million TV money from cable every year. The Marlins collect $15 million, 250 to 15 in the same league. You have two teams, okay, that make less than Ohtani makes per year. So Ohtani makes 70, and you have two teams that pay 26 players under 70. That's not a sustainable model for a business. And the reason why the NFL works so well is parity, right? Everybody gets the same check at the same time, whether you're in New York, whether you're in Buffalo or Jacksonville. That is a sustainable model where you have shared economics. So I'm concerned about baseball and how does a team like Tampa compete with the Dodgers? But the Dodgers, they're printing money and they will continue to print money.
Yeah. All right, so we only have a couple minutes left, and I'd love to take advantage of you being here, and again, for this audience, to give them something to sort of walk out with, something that may be on your mind recently, something you've picked up, and maybe it's even in some of the conversations that we've had with folks, because we've talked to, I mentioned Derek Jeter, we've talked to Hannah Storm, we're talking to Michael Strahan later this week. That's going to be good. I'm excited about that. A couple of New York guys swapping stories. What have you picked up that you're telling other people? Like any stories that you want to share with this audience?
Well, I'll do a little shameless plug. We have one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and one of the greatest tennis players of all time coming.
Yes.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
What I've learned, Jason, is the world's changing more so today than ever before. The world's changed more in the last 5 years than the last 50 years combined. And I think it's going to only speed up the next 5 years. So I think you have to, if you have an MBA degree, almost throw it in the garbage. You got to start again, right? Because the world is changing. If you don't keep up, and I don't mean that. I mean, MBA obviously is amazing, right? But what my point is, you got to continue your education process. It can't stop. And you can't rest on your laurels. That's one thing that how fast and how people are thinking, the really smart people, where the puck is going, not where we are or where we were.
Yeah.
And I think 90% of the people are thinking about now and the past. The real good ones are thinking about what's happening in the future. That's one thing. And then the other thing I would say for all the leaders in the room is I think the biggest problem we have today in this country is a self-esteem issue. And I think it starts with our children and social media. And I think it works up to even adults, right? And I think as a leader, if you can get your teams to enhance their self-esteem and they can believe in your vision and they believe in you, they will protect your company and you like nothing you've ever seen before. And their performance would increase by 30 or 40%. So I think a lot more conversations, show up, be on time, don't just send an email or a text. Sometimes you have to, but there's nothing more powerful than in person. And at the end of the day, people will do business with people with two things and two things only. And that's why I'm doing this podcast with Jason, with Bloomberg, is everybody at the big league level pretty much does the same thing. They're all excellent, but you do business with people you like and people you trust. Simple as that. So work on building your relationships, and I promise you one thing, that when you're 80 years old and you look back, your net worth is gonna resemble your network. So go do some networking.
All right.
All right?
Thanks, partner.
Thanks, Jason. All right, Ben. Thank you. Sure. I'm sorry.